Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. As you'll recall, last week we were discussing the fact that what is the cost, and I called it "At What Cost Dependent Nation." It appears that our nation unfortunately has become dependent on the medical system and the medication systems, etc., etc. And so we'll discuss it a little more, but I want to remind you again to go to our website at mindyourhealthcast.com for all the latest things that are happening, information, and of course to be able to click directly to this broadcast, which I'm sure some of you at least have done. You can go to mindyourhealthcast.com, click on and go directly to the broadcast. Or also now, since we have added the website of alternative health and prevention, you can click also from the homepage of mindyourhealthcast.com and go directly to the alternative health and prevention website. There we have a questionnaire that can be answered, which has actually just been upgraded, that can then give you a printout, which you can bring or mail in depending on the setup that we have with you, and it gives an analysis of the systems based on your symptoms. Also, there are within the website newsletters. They were being updated, and if you click on and don't get anything, you'll know they're still in the process of being updated. But there's going to be more and more information there. We will be collecting emails, so if you go there and register, you can be sent a free newsletter each month as new information is made available. There's also a search engine that you can click on and put the subject you would be interested in getting more information on, and you can then get that information directly from the site. It will give a discussion anywhere from a paragraph or two to maybe several paragraphs or even a page, depending on the complexity of the subject that you have inquired about. Anyhow, it's nice to be back with you again, and today we're going to continue some more on the subject. This is kind of a tough subject. I started out to make it a one broadcast, and it got expanded. And so really what we're talking about is what's happened in this nation, and of course around the world. And when I'm saying that, I'm asking the question in relation to the fact that the health bill for the country and the world has just gone out of sight. There seems to be no end to it. It just keeps rising and rising. And anymore, it seems like almost everyone you meet has some kind of an ongoing health problem and are on anywhere from 1 or 2 to a dozen. And I've seen as high as 25 prescriptions that one individual has. I had a patient come in like that to my clinic, and it ended up, I suspected and told the help that she probably won't be back, and she wasn't. There was no way she could manage doing any kind of program to get her off of the drugs when she's taking 25 medications a day. The doctors would, I'm sure, be reluctant to take them off, as occurs so many times, because they're telling people, if you don't take this drug, you're going to die, and so the people are afraid not to take it. So once they're on them, they're pretty well stuck unless they're brave enough to go out and make some changes on their own. And as a consequence, then the bill has gone out of sight. But of course, what concerns me is if you go back and look at our homotoxicology broadcast we did, and if you didn't, it would be worth your while getting the DVD and information regarding that, because that's really how you get sick and how you get well. And if you actually don't manage your problem properly, then what happens is you actually get worse, because the body gives you symptoms in an attempt to get rid of problems. And if you then don't take care of all of that, meaning that you don't help the body or just let the body do its own thing, and you take some type of suppressive agents, you're going to actually weaken the body and bring on more serious issues. If you did not see that broadcast, or if you saw it and it didn't click with you, I would say it would be a tremendously valuable investment to go and get the DVD and the printout information that went with that and get an understanding, because once it really clicks, you're going to find out that you will not want to, in very many cases, ever suppress anything because of what it can lead to. And that was one of the big eye-openers to me when I studied in Germany. The doctors all, at least of the MDs and naturopaths over there, the MDs that were actually working to get people well, and the naturopaths all understood this concept. It was well researched and documented. And once I learned that, it just changed my whole way of dealing with health and health problems. And I think if you did not get it, then and did not see it, then that would probably be one of the best investments in time and a little money that it would take to get it in your life. As we look about, I made the comment last time, and I want to develop it further, that we actually have been being programmed into buying a system that is certainly not to your benefit, but more to the benefit of those who are providing the drugs and the services, that everybody is of the opinion that they cannot survive without medicine. It seems that mankind made it all these centuries and didn't have all of the drugs except for some natural foods and some natural herbs. And now all of a sudden we are being led to believe that you cannot live or exist without all of these expensive prescriptions. The cost to this country has gone outlandish. We're up in excess of $2 trillion, headed toward $3 trillion in the next few years, or $3.5 trillion. And it's not going down. I understand the cost of living goes up and there's inflation and all of that, but if, in fact, the system that we have has been getting people healthier, we should see just the opposite. We should see it going down. And, of course, interesting to me is that the idea that we have this statistical average life expectancy number that periodically is brought up and said, look, our life expectancy is getting longer, therefore we're doing a good job, and yet more people are sick than ever, with more chronic illnesses than ever, at a greater expense than ever, and even younger children now are coming down with old age diseases. Now that indicates that something is wrong. And I believe that there's probably three major factors. We definitely aren't going to be able to get into all of them. One is the whole idea of medicine and where it's gotten to. It's become a big business, and it requires the selling and movement of services and drugs to keep the big industry going, because so many people's livelihood depend on it. And the second big thing is that stress. We're in a period of stress that we've never been in before. And the stress is coming from all kinds of directions. One is the stresses of just living every day, the stresses of earning a living, the stresses of economic up and downs, but also the stress to our body of the ongoing exposure to toxic chemicals and toxic substances, including electromagnetic fog and electromagnetic pollution like we know of never having had in at least the acknowledged history of man. When you read back, there were none of the electronic things, the radar, the cell phones, the microwaves, the radio stations, the TV stations, and all of the other types of electromagnetic pollution that we're exposed to that just never existed before. And so consequently, it's become a big problem. Now, cell phones have become a major problem. I covered this before, that the reports were from WHO and from some major concerns that, well, maybe we ought to think about it. Now there's some solid, very strong evidence coming out. Yes, they in fact do create big problems, and people who use the cell phones all day long against the side of their head are going to be causing brain tumors. Not in everyone, of course, because some people's bodies are stronger than others. But the scary thing is that the younger a person is, like a child, the more likelihood, because the deeper penetration of the electromagnetic field through a thinner skull and therefore deeper into the brain. I had mentioned before about a product that I had run into, and I was looking into it. Well, it ends up that this is actually a small device that adheres to your phone, your cell phone, and it actually has received a U.S. patent. Now, I know there's been several devices and methods out supposedly that would neutralize or at least soften or lighten the effects of an electromagnetic field from a cell phone, but this is the first one I had run into that actually has received a U.S. patent, developed by a Russian researcher several years ago. It has gone through all of the studies and so forth to provide documentation to receive a U.S. patent. It's not outlandishly expensive. We have some actually that are going to be available on our website that you can click on. And they only sell for $40, actually $39.95 plus shipping. And if you're in Florida, it will end up being sales tax. But anyhow, they work extremely well to lighten the exposure. And it's interesting that now the cell phone companies are coming out that are telling you hold the cell phone away from your head, which is interesting from companies who just recently said there's no known evidence to support the fact that this could be dangerous. So anyhow, that's one whole area is the radiation pollution. But the third area is our food. Our food is being processed to death. And unfortunately, that's after it's already been grown in depleted soil that's depleted of minerals and or methods for the plants to absorb minerals so that we can get the minerals we need in our body. Now, most people think of vitamins, but they don't think of minerals. And minerals are extremely important because they're the catalyst either that cause other reactions to take place, or they are very important in terms of building our structure. For example, calcium, magnesium, and silica, and so forth. All of these are very important to build bones and build structure, connective tissue, skin, etc. So it's not just the protein, but it's the minerals that go with it. In the bone, there is a protein matrix that holds the minerals, but nonetheless, we have to have the minerals. And they do wear out, and that's why the bone replaces and puts new ones in if our body is working right. And it appears to me that our osteoporotic program, in which I'm sure some of you saw the broadcast before, and if you haven't, again, it's available on a DVD, that it takes more than just the minerals. It takes the body putting them into the matrix. It's very rapidly become available information now that the drugs that have been put out that supposedly would help in osteoporosis that are very, very expensive are actually just shutting down the cells that make the calcium exchanges and therefore making it look like the bones are loaded with calcium, which they are. Unfortunately, they're not bound into the bone structure, and it acts like a piece of chalk, snaps with the slightest pressure. And I'm sure you've heard already of one of the major medications that it came out that this lady, every bone in her body had minor fractures in it because of the bone looking good on a DEXA scan, but it's just like a piece of chalk. All the bones are snapping and cracking. So anyhow, it may sound like an exaggeration, but we have said for years that you should not take those drugs, that they are not really solving the problem. The body has its own exchange, and when the minerals are wearing out, they're actually exchanged for new ones to keep the bones solid and healthy. And we've had people in their 80s who had an accident or tripped and fell, and when they took them in, they couldn't believe how good their bones were, and they took none of those medications. So basically, we've been led to believe, as I say, with the advertising, and that's the thing that bothers me is that all of this advertising that they've been doing is actually creating a major problem. And the major problem is that we are being programmed that every symptom we get is bad and that it's going to make us sick. And I know that unfortunately that's not the case. that a symptom is the immune response. Getting back to the homotoxicology we mentioned earlier, the homotoxicology clearly shows us that inflammation is a body's response to something being inside that shouldn't be there. And so if our body is doing its job and something gets into our body that shouldn't be there, the body creates an immune response to get rid of it. And that immune response is not an illness. That immune response is the inflammatory response. And the inflammatory response causes redness, heat, swelling, and pain. And it's temporary. And if the body's in good shape, it will rapidly dispose of whatever it is it wanted to get rid of. And then it will settle down and everything will be fine. But we have been led to believe, and very subtly, that symptoms are bad, and therefore if you have a symptom, you are going to feel bad, and we want you to feel comfortable, so we have this drug that will turn off those symptoms. Now, in our minds, it's never necessarily said directly, but the implication is, if you get rid of all the symptoms, then you're healthy. But that's not true, and I had a recent example I've seen, in fact I've seen several over the years, but a recent where an individual was feeling terrible because of kidney issues, and after having received a transplant, they were feeling really lousy until the drugs kicked in, and once the drugs kicked in, guess what happened? The person feels great. They can put anything in their body, they can do anything they want, and no problem, no bad feelings. And so they feel, wow, I'm healthy now, because there's no response. Anytime your body wants to get rid of something, it's going to make you a little uncomfortable till it gets rid of it. And once it's done it, you're fine. Now, there's 3 things you can do, getting back to homotoxicology. The first thing you can do is just let the body do its own thing. And if you're relatively healthy, it's going to do that. Sometimes it may take longer, depending on how much resources it has. And so that leads to the second thing you can do. There's certain herbs, nutrients, and or homeopathics that it can accelerate the process. Not going to shut it down, not going to block the symptoms, not going to manage the symptoms. It's going to allow your body to throw it out, and it actually adds energy and information in the direction your body's trying to go. So it's supportive in nature, and it supports your body to resolve the problem. So if you remember from homotoxicology, once the issue has been resolved, it's excreted out of the body and the problem is finished. Now, it's true you had some symptoms, but those symptoms were not the illness. The symptoms were your body's attempt to correct a problem, meaning an exposure to something that shouldn't have been there, whether it was something you ate, something that you breathed in, or something that was in your water or food besides the food that shouldn't be there. And so that's going to help your body take care of it. Now, we also mentioned that because of all this advertising that's been going on, and I'm sure that there's not anyone that's not aggravated listening to all of this problem of, well, gee, if you've got a sneeze, if you've got a cough, you've got an ache, you've got a slight inflammation, if you've got a headache, you've got this, there's a drug for that, but it could be the sign of something serious. Go see your doctor. And I'm not saying go see your doctor if you've got some serious symptoms, but I don't believe for every little cough, sneeze, or pain that comes and goes and doesn't come back that there is some terrible serious problem going on. And so everybody runs to the doctor, and of course behind that ad there's always that magic pill. Ask your doctor if this pill is good for you. Now, to me it's doing 2 things. It's programming you in a way that makes you think, oh, well, maybe something serious is going on. And number 2, they're saying, well, now if you take this pill, whether it's purple, blue, green, or whatever it is, it's going to make you feel better. And of course, in the ad, they always show the person distressed before and afterwards, how relieved they are and how smiley they are and how great their neighbors and friends and family are all smiling because they've taken this pill. To me, it's funny, but it's not funny that, you know, when you get into the placebo studies, which we mentioned before, they're about in my mind, 38 to 42% effects from placebo. That is pretty much borne out over time with all the studies. There isn't a placebo effect, and that placebo effect is pretty powerful. I told you about some of the studies that were done where some students were actually given a very powerful amphetamine, which revs the system up, but we're told that it actually was a sedative, that it was like a Valium that was going to sedate you down. And guess what? They were sedated, at least a high percentage of them, somewhere up at around 40%. They actually felt sedated from the medication, which under normal circumstances would have revved their nervous system up like crazy. And vice versa. They took people who they had given a very powerful sedative and told them that it was an amphetamine that was going to rouse their body, going to give them a lot of energy. They're going to feel very hyper. And guess what? About 40% of them felt hyper from a sedative because the mind believes it. And I mentioned to you before about the cryobiosin experiment with the cancer, about the tumors going up and down in a person based on whether they believed it would help or it wouldn't help. So it's, to me, it's very hard to separate. And so I mentioned about a book last time, and you'll find it on our website, on the unknown mind or the unknown brain, about how these things in the background can affect us so powerfully, and we don't even sometimes understand why and how, but we think we're being helped by something, and if we do, we can be. And I mentioned the one study on one of the major antidepressants, that one of the people involved in that study had been housebound with their phobias. They could not leave the house, and they were so depressed they couldn't function, and so they were one of the participants in this test on this new medication. And when they took it, by the second day, they felt their depression lifted. They were able to leave the house. They would go out and do all kinds of things they hadn't done before, and they just knew that they had the drug in their case. However, as it ended up, they had the placebo. So it's really even hard to sort, and that's the issues that are raised by the doctor who wrote this book on the unknown brain. Well, what's really going on here? How much of it is really the effect of your belief? Now, I'm saying all that to say that also the question is raised about not only placebos, which means to give you relief or to make you feel better, a nocebo effect. A nocebo means when you believe that something is wrong, you start to feel worse. I'm convinced that all these ads that have been put out are of that nature, that they're making you become aware of little symptoms and making you think, wow, if I don't get some medication, maybe I'm really sick. And even if no one knows if I'm sick, maybe I really am anyhow, and therefore this drug is going to help by relieving the symptoms. And if there's one thing that I think that is extremely important that people understand is that a symptom isn't a disease. A symptom is an attempt by your body to get rid of it. I would say in almost every case. Now, it's not true if you smash your finger with a hammer. That symptom comes from smashing the tissue. Excuse me. So in that case, I know that it's not placebo. It actually, you have crushed the tissue. And that there is something really going on there, like swelling, and I've done it myself. So I know that that's not a placebo. It really hurts because you smashed the tissue and you put pressure on those nerves, those sensory nerves, and so something really is going on. So in that case, that symptom is indicative of something having happened. But if you just have like a sore throat and it's mild, or you've got a mild cough, or you have some indigestion, that doesn't mean that you have some terrible illness, and it may mean you might want to look at your diet first, and you might want to look at your lifestyle. One of the most profound statements that I believe that has been made relating to medicine was Dr. Christian Friedrich Hahnemann, who was the originator of homeopathic medicine as a system. The principle goes all the way back to Egypt, and to the early centuries, but he took it and put it into a system. And he wrote a book about the understanding of medicine and treatment called the Organon. And in the Organon, he makes the statement that the first and highest calling as a physician is to determine what it is that needs to be cured. And what he's saying is, if somebody comes in and after talking with them and discussing their lifestyle, you find out they're doing something that's making their body feel terrible, you don't want to give them a drug to relieve the symptom. You want to have them change their lifestyle first. They may not need to take anything. And so to me, that is profound. That means the doctor has to be tuned in enough and have listened to the person enough. And in his day, even sometimes he talked to relatives and friends by the permission of the patient about their health and about their lifestyle, and found that he didn't have to give them anything. He just had to have them change what they were doing. If they were eating a half-gallon ice cream every night before they went to bed. Now that wouldn't have been the case in his day, but today that could be. If you're going to eat a half-gallon ice cream every night before you go to bed, and we've talked a little bit about blood type and diet, and you're a type A or an O, that the milk in the ice cream is going to cause a terrible reaction, then you don't need a pill for that. You need to decide, would I rather feel lousy, or do I like the ice cream and I'm willing to tolerate it, or what? You have to make some decisions. And so, interestingly, in homeopathic medicine, the responsibility of health was put on the patient themselves to maybe change their lifestyle, or change something they're doing, or maybe their type of work. In fact, it's interesting, that's one of the provings of one of the major substances in homeopathy is a substance called sepia. And sepia is made from the ink of a marine creature called a cuttlefish. Now, interestingly, it makes a kind of a purplish brown line on paper, and so there were people who were making some artistic types of papers or documents using a brush dipped in sepia. Well, anyhow, what they would do is that brush, they needed to keep a very fine point. So periodically, they would put it in their mouth and wet it with saliva so they could make a nice point to work with the sepia. Well, over a period of time, they started getting fairly sick, developing certain symptoms. And so it ended up that under interrogation of what they did, what type of work they did, what they were exposed to, it hit the person, wow, maybe it's related to the sepia ink that's put out by the cuttlefish. And so on doing some special way of acknowledging a homeopathic remedy, what it is and what it can do, it's called approving. They had several people take small doses of sepia and found that it brought on those symptoms that these people were having. So what do you think he should have done? He should have given them some chemical drug that's going to turn off those reactions and let them continue to put this sepia that was bringing on a lot of symptoms in their body and their mouth, or say, don't put the brush in your mouth anymore. Doesn't cost anything. All you have to do is make a change in your lifestyle, and the problem is solved. Because what would happen is that as soon as they quit being exposed to the sepia, the symptoms disappeared. The body was reacting because of this substance, and the way it was reacting produced the symptoms. And once the cause was removed, then the sepia didn't cause it anymore because they weren't putting it in their mouth, and they didn't have to be treated for anything. Now, interestingly, sepia became one of the major remedies in the realm of homeopathic medicine. And it has some very interesting symptoms. It has a lot of emotional symptoms. When the person sits down and starts to tell you about their problems, they start to weep. They become very indifferent to the people close to them, their family and husband or wife and so forth. They have a feeling like everything is collapsing in the body. Almost like, and especially with women, it felt like the uterus is actually going to come out. So they have this downward feeling. So if they take this remedy, it corrects all that. The emotional state improves. And it's also a big remedy for liver and somewhat for kidneys. And all of these things were affected by just this remedy, and that's all these symptoms that people were having that were putting it in their mouth. So I'm saying all that to say is that modern medicine has developed into a big business, high speed, crank the people through fast. So physicians don't take the time or want to take the time to sit down with the patient and find out what's your lifestyle, what do you eat, what's your family background, and now with the new information coming out about epigenetics, we find that practices and things that have been done by parents and grandparents pass on to us that are not in the genes, but will affect how genes work. We will be getting into that more. It's a brand new era. But another interesting thing is that I didn't mention it yet too much, but it should come into play with what we're talking about, is that we need to understand how we are programmed. And by watching these commercials, and they're very clever, and we can talk about one of them, for example. And I still remember it had to do with one of the statin drugs. Whoever prepared it knew all the tricks in catching your attention, scaring you, and then making you think if you took this pill, everything is great. It started out with a gentleman with his glasses on, with his head down, no color, all black and white. He has this very serious look and says, "I was caught blindsided, but I don't want the same thing to happen to you." And then they go on through the spiel about the statin drug, how it could, remember the operative is could. It doesn't say that it will, it said it could prevent maybe some type of a cardiovascular problem or accident occurring down the road. It could. But if you listen to it carefully, it says that that in conjunction with exercise and changing your lifestyle could. Now, as soon as you do that, you're having trouble even proving that the drug itself is doing it if you're changing lifestyle and you're exercising, because those would make changes in of themselves. In fact, that's what we should be doing in the first place so we wouldn't be getting sick. So it's interesting to me that they qualify, but you know what? It's interesting the way they do it is that people don't catch that because they hear the name of the drug repeated over and over several times. They see this person being very sad and distressed because they were caught blindsided. But then the next thing you know, after they go through the spiel with the drug saying it could, doesn't say that it absolutely will, they said it could, along with changes in diet and exercise, prevent you from having some future problem. It could. Didn't even say, even with the lifestyle and exercise, that it might change. And the food changes, it didn't say that it would, it said it could, along with this drug. But it could without the drug. Anyhow, when it's all said and done, here you see this person outside in nature, in the bright sunshine, instead of this black and white beginning with this very distressed look. Now you have the person laughing and smiling, and the family's with him laughing and smiling, and everybody's laughing and having a good time. The inference is that taking this drug is going to make that happen. Now, to me, that's a pretty powerful program. The way it was done, it drew you in by scaring you a bit because it happened to him, it could happen to you. Well, it's true. An airplane could fall on you walking down the street. It could happen. Not likely, but it could, and it has in a few cases. But it's so few cases that statistically it's almost zero. So anyhow, these ads are designed to draw you in. And unfortunately, people don't understand how they can get drawn in. So I'm going to tell you about two pieces of information I think are going to be very important to you. If you can find it, and you should be able to, it's out there. And that is that many years ago, I ran across material from a researcher from McGill University, and his name was Marshall McLuhan. And he wrote a very interesting book called Understanding Media. And that book opened my eyes a lot to media. He later, because it was kind of meaty, you had to think about it, he came out with a simpler version later called The Medium is the Message. And that kind of explained what he said in the bigger book called Understanding Media, and made it, there was a lot of illustrations and graphics to make it more understandable. Then later, I think he came out with a third book to explain the second book called The Medium is the Mess Age, M-E-S-S Age. Anyhow, it's very good material, and he talks about the impact of media on us. And it's very important that you get an understanding of that. And what he did, he divided media into some different types, all the way from cold to hot media. So he said, for example, that written material, as a rule, is a more cool or cold type of medium. You read it in the paper that somebody had a big disaster halfway around the world, and you think in your mind, gee, that's too bad. I feel sorry for the people. And it affects you some, but not so much. So he said that's kind of cold. Now, if you hear it on the radio and you get the voice inflections, that warms it up a bit more, and so it has a bit more impact. If somebody is putting a lot of emotional content, or I should say overlay in the content, as you hear it, it's going to have more impact. So that's kind of maybe warm medium. On the other hand, television or videos that, especially a video or a movie, is going to impact you more because now you can see it. So now you're calling into play your vision, your hearing, and it has more impact than just reading alone and or hearing alone, but now you're seeing it. It's like you're pulled into it. And he said that that's hot media. And especially hot is a live broadcast on the scene, right where it's happened. So that's extremely important that to understand how much those visuals can pull you into it so you are there. You end up being right there in the middle of it. And I remember CNN being over in the Middle East when all of the big upheaval with Iraq was going on and all the problems with Kuwait and so forth. Here's a reporter standing there, and you're seeing the shells going, and you're seeing the tracers at night, and you're right in the middle of the war. Now that has an impact on you. So when you use those same kind of tactics on an ad, you call into play all kinds of emotions, more so than if you just read an ad about it. You may say, well, yeah, that seems logical, or maybe that might be so. But when you actually are faced with it, and it's like you're there, you've got a ringside seat, that's extremely powerful. And so he does a good job, and you should find his books. You probably can find at least a used copy of Understanding Media, but if not, you probably, I think there's at least a decent version of The Medium is the Message out there. But it's very important to know how we can be moved. And I'm saying all that to say because an acquaintance of mine has done a tremendous amount of studies, and he's written a book, actually. And another gentleman that I don't know personally has written a book. In fact, it goes way back several years ago. And his name was Vance Packard. And he wrote a book called The Hidden Persuaders. And it was about, there's other books out there. I just picked this because Vance Packard's book hit very hard. And again, that's going to be shown on our website on the book list. And Vance Packard showed that how you could embed things in especially the visuals. And he had to do with a lot of TV ads and showed how they utilize things like sex and other things that catch people's attention, but do it in a subtle way so it doesn't really stand out to your conscious mind, but it's there. And I'm saying all this to say is you need to become aware of when you are watching something, what is it doing to you? So this friend of mine, I say friend, I've met him before a long time ago. His name is Eldon Taylor. He's put out a lot of books. And I'm thinking you should there is a newer version of Hidden Persuaders by Vance Packard, but there's also one out called Mind Programming by Eldon Taylor. I know they carried it pretty much all the major bookstores, but we have it on the site too, and you can get it through us at Amazon. If you click off our site, it takes you right to Amazon. You can get it. And he goes into it very thoroughly because he wants you to understand what it does or doesn't do, and how it works so that you don't get pulled into it. I'm telling you all that just for the purpose so you don't get pulled into it. And then he talks about how those principles could be utilized to understand helping yourself. In other words, you could improve yourself using the same principles if you were doing it in a positive, constructive way. So he talks about it, he lays down the principles, he gives examples in advertising, because there are courses for people in the advertising field on how to persuade you subliminally. That means that it happens and you're not aware that it's happening. And so this whole thing of programming is very important, very subtle, but can work very powerfully. Now, we don't really have time to get into the detail that I could, but it goes way back. There's things way back in the 50s where they knew how to embed things in music, how to use reverse speech, and we don't really have time to talk about that, but we will at some point, and how the one part of your brain is very susceptible to reverse speech. And I'm saying all that because Eldon Taylor, well, first of all, he's written a whole report, and I'm going to see if we can't post it as a free download on our site, called Subliminal Technology, The Truth About Subliminal Tapes. Now, some of you, I'm sure, have heard about subliminal tapes, how they may or may not be effective, but Eldon Taylor developed something called Inner Talk, and he will talk about all that in the book, if you read his book on mind programming. And as I say, this report is several pages long, and I'm going to see if my producer cannot get it up on our site for a free download so you could read it. And it looks to me like it's about almost 40 pages long. So it's got a lot of good information. I found it very useful, and I think you will too. But a lot of it's going to have to do with all the talk, and sometimes it makes me think I need to get our teeth out, because that's what those ads are about. The value you're getting from this is the real value of what the ad is. But it's programmed to affect you in such a way that it's going to incite fear. Now, we'll talk just a minute or so about how so many of these things all come together, and they come from so many different directions. Many years ago, you probably heard that in the movies, they found that if they could drop in between the frames the word, some said popcorn, some said ice cream, as you're watching the movie, they were running at about 23 frames a second, so to make the motion look continuous, and therefore you didn't notice them. But the people started buying more of the product when it was embedded into this movie. Now, the interesting thing to me about now with video and with television, you know that the video, when you make a video, you're actually shooting, at least the ones we use, about 30 frames per second. Now, if in those 30 frames you threw in one frame that told you to do something, you wouldn't notice it in those 30 frames. But it can have an effect, and there has been some videos put out that have embedded information in there, but see, the mind sees it even though you consciously are not aware, because it's happening so fast, 1/30th of a second, and it's in, and you didn't even notice it. But it's there. And so there's different ways of doing that, and it's very powerful. And so, and watching it on any kind of video, they're throwing these things in there, and you're not aware that it's happening to you, but you're being influenced. Now, there are a few people that are resistive to any kind of influence, and they're probably going to do the opposite. Or they monopolize it so much with saying the same word over and over and over, which is another way of making it permanent in you, is to repeat it over and over. But there's another one that you haven't thought of, and that has to do with the new discovery of mirror neurons in humans. And the mirror neurons are that we have special neurons that help us copy behavior from other people. Because if we're sitting here watching somebody do something, when they measured the brain of somebody watching somebody else doing something and measured the brain of the person doing it, both people had the same parts of the brain activated, even though the one was sitting there and not doing anything. Now, there's some experiments you can do, can show you how just by changing your thinking, you can affect the physiology of the body. You can make your self capable of doing things. They've even had people learn sports by rehearsing it in the mind and doing it. So the powerful effect of the mind on the body is that most people don't realize how powerful it is. And so these ads are made to get you involved. So I want you to take my word for it. I want you to read Marshall McLuhan's material on understanding media and the medium is message. I want you to read Vance Packard's material on the hidden persuaders, and I want you to do Alton Taylor's, read his material on mind programming, and then you tell me what you think. I believe and I know that because the way they do this, it causes your body to be motivated or moved to do something, even whether you would really do that or not. It's there. So basically, I'm just saying that we're being pushed into buying all these drugs in a very subtle way, and that the way that they set up these ads, and these people are trained, don't kid yourself. If you read Taylor's, you'll find out about the courses that are there that are teaching them how to make an ad persuade you. Not logically, but influencing you in an emotional way. And you know, there's two parts of the brain. We're going to be doing one of the programs on how the brain functions. One is the right prefrontal lobes of the brain, and one's the left prefrontal. The right prefrontal involved negativity, worry, concern, anxiety, and it's hooked directly to the amygdala, which is a part of the emotional memory system of the body, and the senses feed all this incoming material into the amygdala. And if you're watching these negative things happening, what can happen is you're going to activate this right prefrontal, which is going to activate the amygdala and not only bring in bad memories, but a lot of other things, and can get you trapped into thinking, wow, I must be sick, or I'm likely to be sick, I better go check out this pill and get going on it. Whereas on the other left prefrontal lobe has you in a good state of mind. It does not connect to the amygdala directly, and therefore you could watch something and see the humor in it and laugh and have a joyful time and not activate all of this negative side or this problematic side just by what you're watching, if you're aware of what's going on. So to me, that's all very important. And as I say, I've told you about all of the way these things are done, even sometimes the color that they make things, like the purple pill. Looks very desirable. It's a pretty pill. And then when they bring in all of the other things, the visuals and so forth, and besides that, as I say, we're being programmed with these mirror neurons, as if these people are taking these pills and it's making them feel better, you know, then we may be feeling better too if we take the pill, whether it really helps us, but because we expect it to. The expectation is a major factor. And on top of it, it even may cause us to ignore what it might be doing to us, because all those pills have adverse effects. We've talked a little bit before about proton pump inhibitors and what they do in the body, but we will keep reiterating all these things because it takes a while to really learn them. Now, I'm saying all this to say that what we've done is we're creating a nation of people that are dependent on medications because they have become convinced that they're going to die if they don't take them. And I'm not saying that there's never a case where somebody has some actual damage and may require some type of a medicative support, but I would say it's far and few between compared to how many people are on all these drugs. And the drugs then bring on all of their own problems. Then your body is having to contend with that. And because of all of this, we've become dependent on them, and we haven't become better. You know, if it worked and if it was doing what we have claimed it would do, we would all be getting better, but we're not. So we're not getting better. And I mentioned before, people have raised the question, well, gee, if we are so advanced, number one, why are we so far down in the world condition? We spend more than any other country for health, up in the trillions now, but yet we're sicker than ever. Is cancer better? I remember when President Nixon says, we're declaring war on cancer. Is it better? No. In fact, it's worse. Now it's somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 people are going to have cancer. Now that is not better. And we are spending fortunes in research, but what's happening? Any results? No. Are we living longer with it? No. We're going to be doing a specific broadcast, or probably 2 broadcasts, on cancer, and we hope to do some eye-opening things. We're going to be doing one on AIDS that I think is going to be really eye-opening, and we're going to be doing some on immunizations. I just was trying to get information off of the CDC website on how many people have had problems with immunizations, how many people have had problems with flu shots. Well, you know, they aren't giving direct numbers anymore. Used to, I got a number some time back from them that every flu season, in this country alone, not the world, 36,000 people die in flu season either from the flu or the flu immunization. But now you can't get a separate number. At least I couldn't. I was through there looking a lot of different ways, and every way I come up, it's kind of like a lot of double talk. They're not really giving you numbers, saying, well, you know, there was some deaths, but we're not sure that we can really attribute the death to the vaccine, and therefore we're not counting that as a death from the vaccine, so we're not sure if there's any. And so what they're doing is they're dancing around now. I tried to get nosocomial deaths, how many people get killed in a hospital by what the hospital did, and that I really had some fuzzy time getting answers to. I asked about also how many people now are dying from the wrong medication or interaction of medications or whatever. I was not able, and I'm not saying it's not in there somewhere, but I think it's pretty well hidden. I could not get any definite information on it. It would appear that the public is beginning to get a bit more educated, so consequently, they've decided maybe to obscure some of these numbers. There's more books coming out. There's more people that are investigating and looking into the healthcare system. There's some scandals breaking. I'm sure you've heard about the one with the immunizations and the doctor out of England that did the research that they tried to actually intercepted phone calls illegally and have tried to blacken his name and caused all kind of trouble because he was willing to speak out. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of turmoil. And you know that the fact is that this health bill has just gotten outlandishly high. When you're going to be talking about $2.4 billion, probably this year, and by 2015, they're talking maybe $3.5 billion being spent, but people aren't getting well. So there has to be a change occur in our system. And as I mentioned earlier about the book, and it's going to be on our list of books to get, called The Cost of Being Sick, a Prevention Initiative. Basically, what's really going to happen is that we're going to have some preventive measures going on. It just ends up that we cannot continue to pay this bill. Everybody is scared because the pharmaceuticals have them believing that they can't live without their drugs. But apart from that, we cannot pay for all these expensive diagnostic tests and all these expensive drugs. And of course, they keep coming out with the new ones. I mentioned before that I subscribed to a service once just to try to keep up with the medications, and that there's at any given time 15,000 drugs circulating on the market, prescription drugs, and every month I would get 200 or 300 pages that had to be changed because they were dropping drugs out either because there were problems with them, they were ineffective, or they had gone out of their patent and had to go generic, and they had to make changes. That's too many. 15,000 drugs circulating, that's basically way beyond what there ought to be. There aren't that many named illnesses, I don't believe. At any rate, what we need to do is realize that we have to look at this in a whole new way. No money is really being spent for prevention, and even when they talk about prevention, it isn't really prevention that's happening. Giving somebody an immunization of a toxic substance that creates other problems is not what I would really call prevention. Prevention means you have to take responsibility for your own health, you have to take responsibility for your diet and your eating, and you have to take responsibility for moving your body around, and you have to take responsibility for managing your weight, and you have to take responsibility for learning how to handle stress. Now, all those things can be done, and there are many people who are doing them. The problem is that there's no big money in that. And that's why we can cut the costs. And of course the other big one, which we've mentioned earlier, is the food, is correcting the food. We can correct the soil, and that's being done. I visited a group of farmers out in Kansas. They were from the Mennonite religion, and they had given up using the artificial fertilizers and the pesticides and all that, and they were going back to actually correcting the ground and growing food in a good way. And, you know, when they start pouring all this stuff on the ground, there's no earthworms, which are very important to aerate the soil, and they mix things with their diet or their recycling system that are all important to healthy soil. And those all disappear when you're dumping ammonia on to get the nitrogen. That does not support life, and it certainly is going to drive the bacteria away that are necessary to chelate out the minerals from the soil to get in a form that can go into the plants and ultimately to us. So there's a lot of things that have to be done. None of them that are outlandish expensive compared to the $1 trillion is being spent on this, what I would call sick system, because it is very sick, and it's really profit driven. I hate to say that, but I've observed over 40 years that the bottom line is it's profit. I've looked at a lot of the methods. We mentioned a little bit of it here. Remember that we talked about placebo, and placebo is when you feel better because you believe you're going to feel better because somebody says this medication is going to make you feel better. But there's a nocebo, which says if you have this symptom, you're probably going to have something really bad wrong with you. You're going to get sick. And so, consequently, it can go either way. They can talk you into feeling sick, or they can talk you into feeling well. And it's possible. If you have enough faith in it, it can happen. So we don't want to keep this going the way it is and be what I call the slave to a system that is eating people up as fodder to feed it. Now you look, I've mentioned before, and I'm going to say it again, you look at all these various foundations and programs that over the years have been researching that they were going to solve all these problems. How many have actually solved the problem? Has diabetes been cured? Has cancer been cured? Has rheumatoid arthritis been cured? Has Alzheimer's been cured? Has any of these things been cured? But yet billions and billions of dollars go into research and the expense of supposedly finding an answer, and billions of dollars go into the treatment of the symptoms of these things. But are they better? Of course not. Now, I hate to say it, but I feel that I need to say it. I believe that these institutions, once they're set up, become self-sustaining and need money to keep going because a lot of people get their income from it. And so then we can't afford to get rid of the disease because then all these people will be out of work. And I think we need to think seriously about this. that there's no way we can afford this kind of cost and be sicker on top of it. So I'm proposing that people start informing themselves. Now, I mentioned this book, The Cost of Being Sick, which will be on our book list. Another big one called Who Gets Sick? How Beliefs, Moods, and Thoughts Affect Your Health. And that will likewise should be on the list. I mentioned earlier about the book about the undiscovered or unknown mind, how the human brain defies replication, medication, and explanation. And basically, he's the one that does all the talk about the placebo effect and nocebo effect. And this is brand new out, so I think you want to look at this. It will be in the list. This is one that's been out a while called The Placebo Response, How You Can Release the Body's Inner Pharmacy for Better Health, Howard Brody, MD. The other guy's name was a doctor, researcher, John Morgan. The information is all out there, but people are looking for the magic pill. I believe it started many years ago with Speedy Alka-Seltzer ads and these type of things, making people think you can do whatever you want and we've got a magic bullet to take care of it. It does not work, has not worked. It's proven not to work because of the bill. The bill keeps going up and people keep getting sicker. Now, those two are the strongest arguments that it isn't working. What is being done today is not solving the problem at all. I mean, if you look, it's just not there. The divided mind. This is one that should be on the list, called the epidemic of mind-body disorders, meaning problems caused by the mind. So we have to look at the attitudes and all the things that we've been talking about. Something new I mentioned, the epigenetics. This is the actual one of the latest books. The earlier one is called The Genie and the Genes by Dawson Church, who's a PhD researcher. This is one of the brand new ones out called The Ultimate Mystery of Inheritance, Epigenetics. We don't have time to get into that in detail, but it's something that you definitely should be looking into. It will be on the book list. You can get those through Amazon directly from our site. This is one I found to be extremely interesting, called Heal Your Mind and Rewire Your Brain. I mentioned earlier that they found that the brain can grow new neurons, called neurogenesis. The brain can change the way it operates, brain plasticity. Nothing is fixed like we were told, and therefore we got to do all these expensive things because you can't correct it. You can correct anything. If you want to talk about the psychoactive drugs, look at Dr. Peter Bregan's book, which we've mentioned before. He's an MD psychiatrist, graduate of Harvard, taught psychiatry, and he's got a very powerful book called Toxic Psychiatry, what all these drugs are doing. They're not solving the problem. They're not getting people well. They're getting more people on drugs, and it's forever. Dr. Bregan believes that you need to correct the psychological state by psychotherapy, which is what they all started out to do. But now it's become another part of the drug machine. It just goes on and on and on. More drugs for this, more drugs for that. Now drugs for the side effects of this drug. And pretty soon people are on 5, 10, 15, 20. And the highest that I personally have seen is 25 drugs. I mentioned earlier there was a pharmacist I read about, worked in a hospital, and he was becoming very disenamored with modern medicine and pharmacy. And one day, for one patient in the hospital, he received 52 prescriptions from several different doctors. And when he looked at it, he said, there's no way I'm going to give this to this patient because it's too much. No one has any idea what mixing these 52 drugs in somebody's body could do. He folded up and walked off the job and said, that's it, I quit. That's where we're coming to. It's just an assembly line of rushing you through, giving you a drug for a symptom, knowing you're going to be back next week, next month, next year, which is fine because that's called practice building. But are they solving the problems? No. Are people getting better? No. Are they getting healthier? No. I hate to go over the same thing so much over and over and over, but that's where we've gotten to. We have to take responsibility for learning what's going on. You know, we can think, at least we're supposed to be able to think. We have to learn what's going on. We have to go out and learn to read. We have to learn to watch those ads on TV and see where they're snookering us into with their programming to feeling sick and got to go run out and buy the drug. And we've got to look at prevention in terms of learning how to eat properly, learning how to select food in general, learning how to deal with stress, getting rid of some of our emotional garbage so it's not driving us to either become overweight or to ruin our health in some other way. We need to deal with all these issues if we're really going to be healthy. That's the problem with the cost, and the cost is going to continue to rise if we continue to do what we've been doing. Now, I'm sure you've heard the old saying, and it's probably overworked, but I'm going to say it again anyhow. If you keep doing the same thing over and over and you expect a different outcome, that's called craziness. And we're not going to reduce the health bill, and we're not going to improve people's health if we keep doing what we've been doing, because it's already not happening. The bill goes up and the health goes down. Now, something is wrong. If the system were working, we should see people getting better, the bill coming down, and the health going up. None of that is happening. Anyhow, I've said enough to, I hope, incite you just a little bit to say, gee, we need to do something. And the answer is not with the president coming up with a new health plan that pays out more money and covers more people. It already isn't working. We don't even have to know whether it's a good plan or not. It's not going to work because it's using the same thing, doing the same thing that we've been doing. The only thing that's going to be different is that less people are going to have access to it, and they're going to decide whether you should even be treated, whether you're going to live or die. Somebody else is going to be deciding that for you. So there's a lot of dangers to what's coming up, and I don't know if we've paid attention. Anyhow, that's enough for today. That's the end of this broadcast, and we'll be coming back this next week with something new and provocative. Not because I just want to provoke, but I do want you to think, and I do want you to understand that you should be minding your health. That's why we call it Mind Your Healthcast. Not only do we want you to pay attention, because that's one use of that phrase, mind something, is mind your health means to pay attention to it, but number two is the relationship between the mind and health, as we mentioned, the divided mind, the epidemic of mind-body disorders. So, I hope we've given you enough to think about, and I do want to post the one paper I read to you by Eldon Taylor on subliminal technology, the truth about subliminal tapes, and something about his inner talk system. And we didn't get into it in detail, but it's unique. It's not what you call a standard subliminal. You have one ear that the material is being said in standard speech. In the other ear, it's in reverse speech. And one of these days we'll be talking about this reverse speech. That's the second time I mentioned it in this broadcast. But reverse speech is going to go to one side of the brain, and the regular speech is going to go to the other, so it's going to influence the whole brain. This is some information that is extremely helpful, and when you read his paper, and it'll be on there as a free download, then it's going to give you some understanding also, and you should read his book on mind programming, because it's going to give you some good information on the whole idea of how we're being snookered into thinking things that we normally might not even think at all. Okay, so tune in to Mind Your Healthcast. Go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com. From there you can click all the way over to FreeDoCast, where this program is actually streamed from. It's called freedocast.com. But if you want to go directly there, then you have to add a slash at the end of that and put Mind Your Healthcast to take you to the video. If you go to our mindyourhealthcast.com site, you can click directly to that. And don't forget our new website on alternative health and prevention. You can click to that directly from Mind Your Healthcast. Also, a questionnaire that you can take on your health, and it's now working with more questions. There's newsletters available, and if you leave your email on there, you'll be mailed automatically newsletters on a monthly basis of new subjects. And thirdly, you can research any kind of subject related to health. There is a search engine. You can type in the subject, click it, and it will bring up information about it. It's not going to be an in-depth medical encyclopedia, but it will give you some basic information about it and how it could be maybe handled or corrected using natural health. Okay, I think that we've come to the end of our broadcast. It was nice to be with you again. Until next week.